Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and St. Petersburg is almost upon us. It's been a long wait, almost 6 months, but we have got how many days? 20 something?
24 when this goes out. So we're almost there. We've got through a very, very long off season.
I'm not sure we can quite believe it. I don't know if the viewers can believe it, or the listeners, but you've made it with us. We are almost there. We have 24 days to go, 3 episodes, including this one. So we're actually almost there. And with 3 episodes left, I think finally our 2024 preview is starting to roll. The look ahead is starting to happen rather than the off-seasoning slog. That seems to happen every week. So there is no more off-seasoning. So thank you, off-seasoning, for your time. It was truly an honour to share it with you. But let's look ahead to this episode and this season. We know IndyCar is a growing sport. It's going international. But one thing maybe that people struggle with is trying to access it. It's a sport, if you're used to F1, if you're used to Formula E, if you're used to Formula 2, it's quite difficult to get into IndyCar knowing the basics and getting known to the series. So what we're going to do today is just give you a bit of a guide to the series ahead, let the sort of newer viewers know what IndyCar is about, what we do, what we don't do, just a bit of an overall introduction to IndyCar. So this is going to be one for all the viewers, new and old, to listen to as we kick off our previews for 2024. Let's start off. What is IndyCar? I mean, we could really go down many rabbit holes here. Long story short, it's the premier open wheel racing category in the United States. There's a lot more than that, but if we were to give it a title, it's the premier open wheel racing in the United States.
Yep, it's an open wheel series. It's a part spec series, which for people who don't know means that it's the same chassis, but there are some parts of the car that can be developed. They race on road courses, which are permanent tracks, street courses, and then ovals, which are your circular tracks. And that's the basics.
And the last point, which is probably a very significant one, I'm sure we've always been frustrated, as well as many IndyCar fans, as the perception of it is, it's an oval racing only series. And don't get me wrong, in the early 2000s, it's a lot more prevalent. But what we've got this year, 4 different oval tracks. Yes, there's 6 oval races, but it only makes up about a third of the schedule, which is a lot different than the perception there is. And what sort of makes it so fantastic is you've got 3 different disciplines for drivers to be good on. You've got some drivers who are better at ovals, let's say, like Santino Ferrucci or Conor Daly, are fantastic at an oval, but their skill set isn't in a road course. Whilst, let's say, Alex Palou isn't as strong as the ovals, but he's absolutely fantastic when it comes to road courses. And that's what's so great. It's testing you on 3 different skills. And if you want to become an IndyCar champion, you've got to adapt to these 3 different skills, which isn't really something that's prevalent in anywhere else. Where, yes, there's a few series that do both, but IndyCar is sort of the only one to mix them all together.
Yeah, I mean, let's just get on to the track types while we're at this. So, yeah, there's 7 road course races this season, which is, there's a wide variety of permanent tracks, a mixture of speeds, surfaces, undulation, in some very picturesque settings as well. Then you've got 5 street tracks, some of the most iconic races, such as Long Beach in California. The season opens on the streets of St. Pete in Florida, a seaside track. Then the season ends on the streets of Nashville, going down the iconic Broadway in Nashville. It's the first time that the season finale has moved there. So that's one of the stories to look out for this year. There's also Detroit and Toronto in terms of street courses, which are tight, they're challenging. Drivers have to work hard to keep the car out of the wall, but still they provide good racing. IndyCar seems to be able to race anywhere.
It is a case of we sort of race anywhere and everywhere. I think I highlighted once that we race on an airport, on a runway of an airport. What a weird place. I mean, airport's been quite a long tradition in IndyCar, but St. Petersburg, as we said, is sort of run on an airport. And there's various other different quirks, and sort of a case of you sort of can race anywhere. There's sort of been places in recent years where you don't think you can make a track out of it. But places like Nashville, we've certainly we've almost navigated around a stadium in Nashville in recent years. So it's quite an impressive feat that IndyCar is able to do that. And the variety of tracks is so fantastic. You've got a nice modern approach at some of the tracks, whilst you still have loads of history in the likes of Road America, for example. dating back to the early days, and of course, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So a huge range of tracks and huge range of challenges, and they're all just very unique in character. They've got a lot of differences.
So in terms of ovals, as you said, Dan, there are 4 tracks on the calendar this year, but 2 are double headers. So there are 4 oval races, and many people, again, as you've mentioned, say that ovals are just driving in circles, turning left, but that's just not the reality. There's so much more, and I think this is the biggest misconception about IndyCar is people seem to just think, well, they're just driving in circles. For a start, there are different track types, but even in terms of ovals, each one is different to the other in terms of the length, in terms of the surface. Some might be smooth, some might be bumpy. You've got the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where we have the most iconic race, the Indy 500, which is a 2.5 mile super speedway. But then you have a variety of shorter tracks, which are all around a mile at Iowa, Gateway, and then Milwaukee, which is returning to the calendar this year. And I think it's the ovals that make IndyCar kind of so complete and actually separate it from other open wheel series, because nowhere else do you get oval racing. I think it's a big misconception, really, that oval racing is kind of damaging and a reason to not watch the series, because it's just so much more than turning left. I mean, the speeds are terrifying, but the drivers then have to go as close to the wall as they can to get as much out of a lap as they can, and you have to stay out of the marbles from worn tyres, which is kind of just evidence of all the precision that's required. I mean, the bravery as well. At the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the Indy 500, you get speeds over 240 miles per hour, which is incredible, really. And, you know, there's just so many decisions to make, so many details. You have to negotiate, you know, overtaking lapped cars. You have to manage your tyres. You have to make adjustments from in the cockpit, which can give you the edge. It's constant overtaking, constant strategy games, and you know, the cars have to be set up to perfection. The drivers are a big part of this, and ultimately the racing is just always so tight on ovals. And you know, if you're just out of the setup window, you could be right at the back of the field, which kind of evidences just how competitive IndyCar is. And just so much goes into oval racing. It is not turning left. That is only a very minute part of it.
So even if it was just turning left, I think, like you said, there's so much more that goes into it. I think they have to be at all these speeds and they have to be so precise with what they do, and even 1 centimetre could make them go out. And not even just to race on ovals, it's racing on ovals with other cars, which is on the road it's already dangerous enough, but I think with other people and with the amount of cars that we have, it's honestly spectacular that people can do that, and there's not as many crashes as like there is, and there's not more dangerous crashes, because I think what they do is just so impressive that they can do it and do it with so many other people. And I think that's kind of what draws people in. It's kind of, yeah, it's just that everyone can do it. Well, not everyone can do it, but
I think the thing about oval racing is there might be some listeners, viewers here, but it's one of those things we don't really know what it's like until you give it a go. Most people who say oval racing is driving left have never actually watched an oval race, which doesn't really make sense, because in some aspects they are the most exciting racing. Because if you've got 20 cars in a 25-second lap, there's going to be cars everywhere. There's battles everywhere on track, and there's always something to look out for. And that's why you get literally thousands of overtakes in a race at one point, and there is always something to keep an eye on. And there's not really any point saying oval racing going left in circles if you haven't actually watched oval racing. It's a fantastic discipline in motorsport, which is just as challenging as driving on road courses. If anything, you've got less area for mistakes, because at the end of the day you've got a wall on either side of you. So it's a completely different style. It's a completely different art. Some people absolutely master it, but you can't really say oval racing is poor if you haven't even given it a go. So any viewers who might be thinking like that, give it a go and just see how it is. You know, you can't really say if you like it or not until you've watched it. But I think maybe from another viewer standpoint is what makes IndyCar attractive to watch? Why should I spend my Sunday evenings or Sunday afternoons watching two and a half hours of racing. What is it about IndyCar which brings us to it?
I mean, we've just covered off the biggest misconception about it only being ovals, and obviously one of the things is the versatility of the circuits that IndyCar races on, but that's only one thing. I mean, the racing product is the thing that everyone always earmarks. I think the levels of overtaking are pretty ludicrous. Even on the tightest street track with 90-degree corners, you will still get some just ridiculous racing, and nigh on every race really exceeds the most ever overtakes that you will ever get in an F1 race, which is astonishing, to be honest. And I mean, we mentioned the ovals on the short oval race, on the short ovals in Iowa last year. I'm pretty sure each race had about 1,500 overtakes. There are no blue flags on short ovals, which is something to keep an eye out for. So passing lapped cars, I think, counts in that statistic, but it's still, passing lap cars on the short oval is a challenge, and that adds to the spectacle when we get to that point of the year. But I mean, the cars are incredibly robust. I think that's one thing I particularly have noticed, that you can race wheel to wheel. Drivers are super aggressive because they don't have to worry about, just a little break to their front wing. In F1, for instance, you might see, I think it was Haas had quite a few incidents where their front wing end plate just ends up dangling off. In IndyCar, the cars are just incredibly strong. I mean, every car has the same chassis, which helps, but then we kind of get into the area that there are some, aspects that can be developed as well. So, for instance, dampers, they can be developed. I think it's a lot more than just a spec series. There's so many setups that are possible, which is kind of giving you the best of both worlds, because F1 is all about the development race, but sometimes that can kind of be to the detriment of the series being particularly competitive at times, like we've seen in recent years. Whereas IndyCar, they've got the same chassis, whereas the teams can still give their drivers the edge, for instance. And, maybe that does still benefit the higher funded teams. But I think the balance in IndyCar is good, whereby, there is development, but it remains really competitive. And I think you will... I think the other thing I want to mention as well is the fact that the cars just feel alive. Not that, maybe in other racing series they don't, but the drivers always look like they're on the edge of almost an accident, but they are properly, what they'll say, wheeling the car. It's incredible, really. I think the competitiveness is the thing that really stands out. You can very rarely predict the race winners, for instance. The championship had gone down to the final race every year since 2005, I think, until Palou won it last year before the final race. They're the main things, really, and that's just touching the surface as well. I mean, we have 27 cars on the grid, rises to 20. Is it 20? It remains 27 on ovals this year, I think.
Yes.
Ed Carpenter Racing ran. There were 28 on ovals last year, but there will be 27 this year, apart from the Indy 500, which we'll come on to in a whole different segment. But there will be 33 cars racing in the 500 come May. So, that's the surface of things. I think there's more I can mention, but I'll give the floor to you guys. Why do you love IndyCar so much? And maybe Ellie, as a new fan, kind of what has attracted you to the series?
I think it's kind of similar with what you said, especially kind of compared to F1. I think you have them battles and you have the closeness, but at the same time they're not as competitive, I'd like to say, as they are in IndyCar. It's like IndyCar, they will go wheel to wheel, like you said, and they won't be afraid to kind of not necessarily crash into someone, but they won't be afraid to kind of crash, and they won't kind of be afraid to have kind of the accidents, and they won't play it safe. I feel like sometimes that happens in F1, as much as I don't want to say it. So I feel like I really like the thing about IndyCar was there was so much going on at once. I feel like you never feel like you get bored as well. I feel like there's always something going on, whether it's someone in the front or if it's someone in the back or whatever. And the strategies as well is what kind of confuses me, but also it's really nice to see that, like you said, it's going on with a lot of stuff is going on, which can feel very overwhelming at first, but when you kind of understand what's going on, kind of everything makes sense. And I feel like it keeps you on the edge of your seat all the time, and it kind of, you never feel like you're zoning out or anything. There's always something going on, and that's what I like about it as well. So yeah, that was mostly it, and I just like the closeness of the cars and the competitiveness and just all of that. That's kind of what drew me in.
I think the racing's very pure in IndyCar. I don't know how to quite describe it, but it is a bit old school. You can get your elbows out. There's not a focus on tyre saving or fuel saving, although it's a factor. It's not the focus of a race. And as I said, you can get your elbows out. You can make aggressive passes. You can, if there's a gap there, you'll go for the overtake. It's a whole range of old school racing combined into one, which just makes it exciting. And you've got these sort of old school races, and I think that's one thing in particular that appeals to me. It's just the diversity of the drivers. You've got a whole range. You've got the traditional Road to Indy system, which is a really rigorous system in building up young drivers, but then it's not like F1 where that ladder stops there, because you've got recruits from all over the place. You've got people from Australian supercars, you've got Argentine touring cars, Japanese super formula who've had drivers from the Formula 2 system, ex-Formula 1 veterans. You could go on and on with the list, but there is a huge range of drivers. Even places like NASCAR, we've had drivers from. There is a huge, diverse scene of drivers, and you think that would equate the skill level a bit, but actually they're all on a very similar level, and they're competing each other. And people from completely different motorsport backgrounds all combine to make this one massively unpredictable series. And I think that is a key highlight of the series. It's unpredictable. I think, as Archie said, it's hard to predict a race winner, to predict a podium before a race. That's an impossible task. You're never going to get it right. I mean, however many times you predict it. And it's sort of anyone can win a race on a given day. If someone gets it right, it's not impossible for anyone to win. And that's the great thing about it. And it's the unpredictability factor is huge, because it just means the championship battle goes to the end, and every race is worth paying attention to, because something amazing could happen, and it usually does. And you don't really ever watch your 2 hours and feel, I've been a bit let down. You always feel like something has happened and it's been well worth your time.
I think I just want to hang on what you mentioned about the drivers for a minute. I mean, it's diverse in terms of background. It's diverse in terms of nationalities as well. It's a US series, but there's drivers from all over the world, as you mentioned. Latin America. We've got Brits. You've got other European drivers. French, Spanish. We've had Japanese, for instance. You've got quite a few Danes and Swedes. So there's a lot of. It's worldwide in that respect. Obviously, it only races in the US, which is disappointing for us as British fans, because it's not as accessible for us in terms of attending races. But actually, I think one big thing that I didn't mention is kind of the access that we get. It almost makes you feel like you are there. The drivers are fantastic personalities. They're quite unhinged in many ways. You have, interviews where they're saying they're going to punch other drivers, and that's the sort of thing we love. That sort of, let's say drama, because it's not manufactured drama or anything. I mean, you get to see the drivers' personalities outside of the track as well. A lot of them have podcasts. They're very active on social media, interacting with fans. We get a lot of behind the scenes insight from that way, and I think there's just a great community feel around the series, and that starts with the drivers and kind of extends to the fans.
I think a lot of the time it makes you feel like you can be friends with them. I don't know if that sounds silly, but it makes it seem like
it's a good way to put it. It's a good way to put it, to be fair.
It feels like you could go to the race, and even though you've never met them, they can tell you all about it, and they can just be really friendly, which I'm not saying other people aren't. I'm just saying it makes you feel more welcome, in a sense of, that what they're saying is not made up. They're not saying it just to say it. Whatever they say or they do is it's just generally down to them.
There's not many PR robots. There's one or two. I'm not going to name names, but there's a lot of people who are very accessible and they will share their lives. They will share memes, Twitter or whatever. There's some drivers who've been known for their incredible personalities. They're just very accessible, which is great. They're just very open about their lives, which is great. They're not managed by some PR person on social media, so it's all very fun.
And one last thing as well on kind of what's attractive about the series is, we'll get onto it in a bit more detail later when we get into some of the listener questions. However, the liveries, there's a lot of colour. There's a big topic at the moment with all of the F1 launches that, there's a lot of carbon, a lot of the cars are a little bit bland, but each driver has their own livery, not just teams. It can be a little bit confusing because they chop and change, even race to race, depending on what their sponsor is for that race. They even chop and change between drivers occasionally, which makes it the most confusing. However, you will be blessed with a very aesthetically pleasing grid with an awful lot of colour.
So any new fans coming over from, let's say, a Formula One background might be intrigued to know the biggest differences. So let's run through some of the biggest differences between F1 and IndyCar. Let's just start off right at the start of the race. F1's obviously known for its traditional standing start format, 5 lights, ready to go. Slightly different. Some people love it, some people hate it. At the end of the day, it doesn't make a huge difference. Where we use the rolling start format. So the grid are lined up in rows of 2, and the pole sitter basically just goes whenever they fancy it, which can actually create quite good racing because there could be one person who's caught out, which can have a chain reaction, the rest of the pack, etc. And it can create a bit more unpredictability into turn 1 because the cars are naturally closer together from where they've rolled off next to each other. Restarts pretty similar. Again, Formula 1's a bit like that, single file restarts, and then leader goes when they're ready to go and everyone else follows. So it's slightly different, but in some ways it almost makes it more entertaining.
Yeah, and they can go as soon as the green flag flies as well. So it's not always down the main straight. There's some tracks where they will be racing before you even get to the final corner, which is, it can be a bit hard to get used to, I will say. But yeah, I do agree with you, to be fair, Dan, that they actually end up packing closer together, the cars, which ultimately ends up with more lap 1 drama or more spectacular overtakes. We had Devlin Di Francesco, who isn't confirmed for this year's grid yet. We'll get onto that when we run through the teams, but he went from 5th all the way to 1st by going out around the outside of 4 cars at one race last season, which is kind of evidence of something that would only happen with those 2 wide rolling starts, which are actually 3 wide for the Indy 500 as well, which is spectacular.
Yeah, I think the only difference kind of coming from F1 first and kind of coming over to IndyCar, it was confusing to me as to when it was starting. Like, it's because they'd go around a couple of times on the formation lap, and then I'd think, oh, they're starting now. But I'm like, no, it's a formation lap. And then I'd be sitting there, and then I think I'd looked away for a second. I was like, oh my god, they're starting. But that was like the only difference.
Yeah, you're right, to be fair. That's one thing that people will notice is they do quite a lot of laps behind the pace car before they get going. They have a morning warm-up session before the race, and then unlike F1, I think where they have laps to the grid, I don't believe that's a thing in IndyCar. So, I don't think it's a thing anyway. I think that's only something you'd really notice if you went to the race. They don't show it on TV if it is a thing because they all start from the pit lane. You have drivers start your engines called, and then that's when they actually roll out on track for the first time ahead of the race, and then.
One thing F1 comes under the fire for a lot is track limits. You'll be that far out and that will be an invalidated lap time. Whilst IndyCar is just if there's a bit of track and you can go on it, that's absolutely fine. Like, as long as there's a racetrack and, if it makes you go quicker, that's absolutely fine. I mean, there's a chicane at the Portland International Raceway, turn 1 and 2, where you've kind of got a curb and you're supposed to go around the outside of it sort of thing. You can sort of just hop over this curb next to the wall. It's how daring you are against the wall. But there's a chicane and you can just completely bounce over the curb and just completely cut the chicane. But you wouldn't get that in Formula 1. The track limits aren't really a thing. Yes, don't overtake someone completely off the track. But as long as the car fits there, just go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously can't blatantly cut a corner. However, to be honest, at a lot of these tracks, you mentioned Portland, they have like bags of water down to stop you from cutting the corner because it would break your car if you hit one of those. I don't know, is like a sign with like the bag of water inside it or something? I think it's yeah, something like that. But yeah, if the track's there, then go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's also why you get really nice overtakes, because at the end of the people aren't afraid to just send it, because one, you've got a nice robust car to chuck it down the inside of someone, but the other thing is it doesn't really matter, because as long as there's track, it will do, which is absolutely great. It makes for quite fun racing as well, to be fair. I think one of the other biggest differences people notice is refueling. Obviously, F1 does one stint and they're set to 105 kilograms of fuel. And whilst IndyCar, you can obviously refuel. It might be a bit confusing at first, but it actually plays to people's benefit. You can do a shorter stint on fuel, which means you can push more, you can set limits more, you can do a longer stint on fuel. And it's another factor that you've got to manage a bit more. There's been instances last year where drivers had to put on the last lap because they ran out of fuel. So it's another element, which again might be a bit confusing, but it actually adds an extra element to the racing.
Yeah, it's another element of kind of that management and strategy. And strategy, you will be confused by it. If you're getting into the series, you will be confused by it. We're kind of, we know what we're talking about now after watching it for a few years, and we still can't keep track of strategies. So you mentioned this, Ellie, you will be confused by strategy, but that's normal because that's just how it is in IndyCar. That's one bit that adds to kind of the excitement of the races as well. And you'll only kind of figure out the true picture when it gets to the very final stint in the end.
I think probably the final big difference is the way the championship runs. The point system is extremely different. F1, you've got 25, 18, 15, 12, blah, 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 blah. Whilst I still don't know what ours is. What, 50, 40?
I've got it here.
40, 35, 32, 30, 28, 26. Yeah. And then it just goes all the way down until like 5.
Yeah, it goes down in twos from like 32 to 20, and then when you get to 20, it goes down by 1 until you get to P25. When from there and lower, I think everyone just gets 5 points.
But what is also a bit confusing is if you retire from the race, you still get points. So if you retire and come 25th, you still get points. But if you retire but you were the 17th car on track still, you get, I don't know how many points, it's 8 or whatever. So it's rather confusing.
It's incentive to keep going if you have had some sort of incident. You'll see F1 teams, this isn't a hate on F1 thing by any means, but there are a few differences that definitely make IndyCar kind of a more exciting, more attractive series. And yeah, you'll see F1 teams retiring the car if they've had a little bit of damage on the side pod or whatever, whereas IndyCar, they will do everything they can to finish the race, because come the end of the season, especially if you're one of the championship contenders, every point can matter. And if you're scoring points for every position, yeah, it's crucial. I mean, I think you get a further point for leading a lap, leading the most laps, and getting pole as well.
And
so
you'll see
the maximum points is 53, I think, from a weekend.
54.
54.
No. Yeah,
I must have missed out something.
You get one for leading a lap, 2 for leading the most laps, and 1 for pole.
Oh, it's 2 for leading the most laps. Cool. Yeah. I missed that.
But you'll see drivers occasionally who are 30 laps down go out. Again, it's really confusing because on the timing screens you'll see about minus 30. Just to make clear, so they're doing more laps, just in case someone else retires, they can get the extra point by doing more laps than them. So it's confusing, but once you get the hang of it, it makes sense. And then that is pretty much it for the points format. It means you get like 700 or 600 points as the champion, which seems like quite a lot. But it's the way it works, and it's quite a fun system, which, it clearly works because the championship went down to the final race 16 years in a row, or whatever the statistic was. So, although it's confusing, it's clearly a good format because it brings excitement right to the end.
Should we go into qualifying?
Yeah. And then we'll go over the qualifying format. So, in some regards, it is pretty similar, where you've got 3 phases and are progressively removing cars each phase. It's different for road course and oval. Let's go over ovals. It's quite easy. you've got all 27 cars, and they go in reverse championship order, one by one, sort of one-shot qualifying. It varies track to track, but to keep it simple, one-shot qualifying for each driver in reverse championship order. Fastest one wins, slowest one's 27th. Pretty simple, and it's quite a fun format.
Yeah, I mean, it's done in speeds rather than times as well, which is a kind of marked difference. And on a regular oval, it's the average speed across 2 laps. For the Indy 500, it's over 4 laps, but we'll get onto that because that's quite a bit different. Although
when you get to double headers, it gets even more complicated. Where you've got the first lap is the first race, and the second lap is the second race.
Yeah, so that sort of thing's confusing, but again, it's something that you kind of get to grips with when we kind of get to that stage.
Yeah, Ira's not till the summer, so you've got months of learning it on other systems. And then, as we said, we've got the road course. Now, 28 cars is a lot to have on the track at once, which is why, obviously, in F1, you traditionally get a lot of traffic issues. So what we do is split the qualifying into 2 groups. I think it's dependent on your final practice result, where 14 drivers go out in the first session and 14 will go out in the second session. The fastest 6 from both of them will transition into what's called the fast 12, with the rest of them just staying sort of as they are, with the 13th and below locked in. Fast 10, fast 12, fairly simple. The top 6 go through into the final qualifying format, whilst the final qualifying format, the 5-stone fast 6, the fastest is on pole in 6th place, finishes 6th. Qualifying is a lot different, where it's, yes, the session's 12 minutes long, but it's a lot faster paced. You'll fuel for 4 or 5 laps at a time and just go for 4 or 5 push laps in a row, which makes it quite exciting because you've just got a constant stream of cars going quicker.
Yeah, qualifying's enthralling. There's no kind of lull mid-session where they're kind of waiting for the perfect time. They're just pounding laps in again and again. And yeah, the timing, I quite like the timing screen. You can see where each driver on their lap is up on the time they need for either pole or to transfer to the next session, or whether they're down. So yeah, I think it's pretty much the perfect qualifying format in terms of levels of excitement.
I will say, though, when I first started watching, it did confuse me having like Group 1 and Group 2 and like how that would kind of like work out. But it took me like a while to realize that like Group 1, they'd have the fastest times, but then they would get the odd numbers, and then Group 2 or whatever would get the even numbers. So that definitely took me like a second or two to kind of get my head around.
And a few bits to note on qualifying. I think the groups that the drivers are in for road and street course qualifying is determined by their times from the final practice session. And then if you get pole for the race prior, you will then be in the first pit box for the next race. The order in the pit lane changes each race and is determined by the previous race's qualifying. Unlike in other series where it will be done in like Constructors' Championship order, there's no Constructors' Championship in IndyCar, so it kind of just changes every week.
Well, let's move on to the big one, the Indianapolis 500. Now, I'm sure almost everyone listening has heard of the Indianapolis 500, but I don't think many people sort of appreciate the magnitude of it. It's called the greatest spectacle in racing, and it's called the greatest spectacle in racing for good reason. And I don't think we can really put it into words what Indianapolis quite is, the significance of it. But it is the biggest race in IndyCar. It's quite possibly the biggest race in motorsport. It's 2 weeks of preparation. You know, you've got like some Monaco and Le Mans where, you know, you've got a couple practice sessions. You've got literally 2 weeks of track action to get ready for this race, to get a car ready to qualify, to get a car ready to set up and run in traffic. And, oh, yes, it's on an oval or whatever. But each corner is a completely different challenge, you know. There's been instances where the guy in first place has crashed in the last corner and lost the race, and it happens like that. And it's quite hard to say it's a 200 lap oval race on paper, but it is so much more than that in reality.
Yeah, I think if, you know, to the question of what makes it so special and what makes it such a great spectacle, I think the amount of work that goes into it, you are right. I think that is kind of the big thing, the staple of it. It starts with a 2-day open test that comes in April. And then when you get to what they call the month of May, which is kind of the term for the whole 500, the whole event, you have 3-day long practice sessions at the start of the 2-week period that the race covers. Then you have Fast Friday, they call it, which sees the engines turned up ahead of a weekend of qualifying. So qualifying is not just one hour-long session; it's 2 days worth of track action. So the first day, the Saturday, basically drivers are trying to lock into positions 13 to 29. But the whole thing is getting in the field. You have to be in that top 29. If you are the top 30, because 31 through however many entries there are, because 33 make the race, but only there could be many more entries. This year we could be looking at 36 cars trying to qualify. But yeah, it's only the top 30 that know they're locked into the race after the first qualifying day, because some teams or some drivers will end up being bumped out, as they call it, on bump day. So yeah, drivers 30 through 31 through, I'm getting my numbers all mixed up here. They will have to come back to contend for the final 3 spots in the race, and then unfortunately some will experience the turmoil of being knocked out of the race. But yeah, with 13 to 30 locked in terms of their qualifying position, that means the top 12 also return on the Sunday, because they're fighting for pole. Their positions are not locked in. They only know that they will start inside the top 12. So yeah, it's a very exciting weekend of track action the week before the actual race.
It's a long process, and when it comes to May, we will give you the full rundown, make sure you are well briefed in what happens. But it means so much to the drivers. I think a lot of drivers will not consider their career complete unless they've won an Indianapolis 500, and that's the case for many drivers. I think Will Power was one, Joseph Newgarden is one, whose career won't be seen as complete until they've won the Indianapolis 500. It is bigger than winning the championship. It means anything to any of these drivers to win, and that's why you'll see drivers taking every risk possible to win it, because you will go down in the Motorsports Hall of Fame if you win in Indianapolis 500. You can name a lot more Indianapolis 500 winners than you can IndyCar champions. And yes, the championship means a lot. It's what you're fighting towards. But the Indianapolis 500 is where the fame is. It's where the prestige is. It's where your name will be written down in history. It's
legacy defining for sure. That's something that, yeah, Joseph Newgarden would not have been considered IndyCar great, even if he would have won. You know, he's on 2 championships at the moment. He could have won more championships, but without winning the 500 last year, something will have been incomplete. And I mean, you see the emotions when someone does win the 500. He went and jumped into the crowd to celebrate. It kind of just showed what it all means. And yeah, you kind of do have to witness it to realize exactly how monumental an event it really is.
And every year, it sort of gets more significant and more special. I think the more you watch it, the more you understand the prestige, the more you understand the significance. And it's also just a fantastic race to watch. It's 3 hours of flat out racing, 200 miles an hour, walls on either side. And it's just relentless. It just doesn't stop. And it's also just so unpredictable. You'll have cars cycling away through the field. You can have last lap drama. I mean, last year, for example, the race was literally won on the final straightaway. It was sealed before corner. Was it 798 or 799 of 800? You cannot count out anything until the very last lap, and it is just a truly great event to watch. Obviously, there's the whole Triple Crown thing, but I think Indianapolis is astronomically better than the other two. One from a racing spectacle, and two almost from a prestige spectacle as well.
Yeah, I think as well. I think there was a video or something going around. Some of the drivers being asked would they rather win the Indy 500 or like the championship, and some of them would say the Indy 500 because it's like you said, it is that big, and it's kind of one of them things where not everyone has to win, but everyone wants to win. That's the one that people are really looking forward. They'd rather kind of win that sometimes than the home races. Like that's how important it is to some of these drivers.
And I think something people might not realise, this is the biggest single-day sporting event in the world. It's the biggest sporting arena in the world. There are, I think, upwards of 350,000 people attend the race every year, which is astonishing, really. So yeah, IndyCar it's the Indy 500 is what it's the staple event. Many people know it just for the Indy 500 and aren't aware that there's such a great spectacle going on all season long. But yeah, the 500 is the big one, and that's the one that everyone should definitely be most looking forward to if you are a new fan.
I think I'm right in saying, I might be wrong, but after COVID, it was the biggest gathering of people. Because
you're right.
100,000, it's crazy. And in Indiana is a completely different place in May. It's not just this ascent to the speedway. The whole city changes. The whole city stops for this race.
Streets are renamed. Streets are renamed after drivers.
Yes. It's a completely different place, and Indiana is all for it. And yeah, there's not really any way to really fathom the magnitude of it until you've actually watched it and understood it. Because it is just incredible. There's nothing bad about it. I don't have a bad word for the Indy 500. Right, the DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast actually has some exciting breaking news to bring you. We are actually sponsored. Believe it or not, we have made it here. So I'm glad to announce we have now started a partnership with Formula Model Shop, which is the best place to get any IndyCar merchandise in the UK and in Europe. Obviously, a lot of you are listening from the UK, and obviously we're working together as a team to help grow IndyCar in the UK and Europe, which is what we all want to do. It's why you're listening. It's why we present this podcast.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, all in one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit our Instagram highlights on the DIVEBOMB Instagram for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
You can find the FMS site via a banner on the DIVEBOMB website or by visiting formulamodelshop.co.uk. Stay
tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
Thank you to Formula Model Shop.
So, really, what makes the series is the teams, the drivers. So it's definitely worth us now kind of taking you through who's on the grid for this year. I mean, there's one team we're yet to find out, but there are 27 full-time entries. Obviously, as we said, for the Indy 500, you do get one-off entries, which I'll come on to at the end of this. But yeah, so there are 15 cars powered by Honda. There are 12 powered by Chevrolet. They are the two engine providers. But we'll take you through team by team for each manufacturer. So starting with Honda, you've got Chip Ganassi Racing, who are pretty much the best team in the series at the moment. They got the top two. Two of their drivers were in the top two in the championship last season. They have 15 championship wins, 5 Indy 500 victories. And they've been in IndyCar since 1990. And this year they are one of the biggest stories because they are jumping up from 4 to 5 cars, which is an interesting thing in IndyCar as well, that teams do not have to run a uniform number of cars. So in terms of their drivers, they've got Kiffin Simpson, who is a rookie this year. He's 19 years old, stepping up from Indy Lights, or Indy Next as it was renamed last year, which is the highest series in the IndyCar feeder series ladder. He's a guy who's had success in sports car racing, but the expectation on him is not too high this year. He didn't kind of set the world alight in Indy Lights, let's say, but he's an interesting one to watch. Then you've got Linus Lundqvist, who's a Swede. He won Indy Lights in 2022. He didn't get a seat for last year, unfortunately, but filled in for the injured Simon Pagenaud at Meyer Shank Racing for 3 races and did such a good job that he was picked up by the best team in the series. So there's kind of a lot of hope in him. You've got Scott Dixon, who is from New Zealand. He is considered one of the GOATs, one of the greatest. He has 6 championships, one off the record. He's second in the all-times win list with 55. He ended last season strong, won 3 of the closing 4 races and finished second in the championship behind his teammate Alex Palou, who is a Spaniard. He was the best driver in the series last year by quite some margin, has 2 championships in 3 years now. He's only been in IndyCar for 4 years. He has 9 race wins, and really, last year was record-breaking. He took 5 wins, and as we've said, won the championship before the final race, which is not something done often. And then the 5th Ganassi driver is Marcus Armstrong, who is another from New Zealand. You might recognise him from his F2 days. He didn't run on the ovals last year, but he still won Rookie of the Year from his road and street course performance. Finished a best of 7th place. Managed 5 top 12s, top 10s in 12 races, which for a rookie is pretty good. But yeah, my question to you guys: why should people root for Ganassi?
It's a difficult one. They're sort of like the Man City of IndyCar. They're the ones with all the funding and all the good people. But if you're looking this year, they're actually quite a fun team to support because you've got the 2 best drivers in the series, I'd say. But you've got them lining up against a really young, promising, developing talents. I'm a big fan of how Linus Lundqvist is developing. He looks like a really exciting one for the future, as well as Marcus Armstrong had a solid first season last year, and sort of Giffen Simpson's only 19, so he's going to have years of experience ahead of him in the series. So I think that's maybe why you want to have a look at Ganassi, sort of use the series. You kind of got the greats, and then they're going to be developing this new younger breed of drivers. So in 2 or 3 years' time, could be right at the front of the field. So it's a nice little blend of characters and blend of really good drivers in there.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you say. It's kind of loads of, well, not loads, but it's really experienced people, and then kind of some rookies, and kind of even when you say Marcus Armstrong, he was a rookie last year and he won Rookie of the Year, but that wasn't anything to do with ovals, and to kind of do that and to see how he would progress, I feel like you kind of want to see that. You want to see how these rookies just progress throughout the year, and I think with a team like Ganassi, I think they're going to have a really good shot, and it's just one of them. It's they have experience, but they also have the rookies and have the newer, younger drivers coming in.
So then the next Honda team is Andretti, who are a household name. A lot of people will know of Andretti, and they're kind of doing the opposite to Ganassi. So whereas Ganassi are going from 4 to 5 cars, Andretti have decided to cut one of their 4 cars and are moving to a 3-car lineup this year. They're one of IndyCar's most historic teams. They made their debut in 1993, but the family, IndyCar has run in the blood of the family, racing has run in the blood of the family. They have 5 championships, 6 Indy 500s. They haven't won a championship since 2012. I don't think they've won an Indy 500 since 2017. So they're in a bit of a lull at the moment. They're looking to kind of bounce back. First of all, you've got Colton Herta in the number 26 car. He is one of the young superstars. He's 23 years old, but he actually took his first IndyCar win at 18, one of 7 victories. He's an American, pretty much America's hope, really. I think when you had all of the F1 links to Andretti, Herta was the one that many people earmarked as being, maybe the guy that could step up. He's looking to rebound, a bit like the team, really. Last season was his first season without a win. Andretti, they've had a tough few years, and Herta's been spearheading that. However, despite being the highest ranked Andretti driver last year, it was his teammate Kyle Kirkwood, who is another American hope, another young American that had a better season. He kind of came disruptor, really. He's 2 years older, but joined Andretti last year in only his second IndyCar season after being with AJ Foyt Racing the year prior. He won 2 races last year. Andretti's only 2 wins, but it shouldn't come as much of a surprise. He won all of the 3 IndyCar feeder series championships in his first year in those series, at least the 3 main series. And in each of those seasons, quite astonishingly, won at least half of the races and often more than that. So he is one of the finest American talents in many years, really, probably since Herta. Then completing their lineup is Marcus Ericsson, who's moving from Chip Ganassi Racing this year. People may be familiar with him from F1. He won the 2022 Indy 500 with Ganassi, but he's moving to Andretti ahead of the season because one facet of IndyCar is that drivers are sometimes required to bring sponsors, others are paid. Ericsson was bringing a sponsor to Ganassi, however, he kind of wanted to pay and deserve that, so he's moving to Andretti as a 4-time race winner, one of the most consistent drivers in the series, and has finished 6th in the championship the last 3 years. So Andretti, guys, what would you say is attractive about Andretti? Why should people root for them?
I think it's just like, I feel like a legacy team in a way. I feel like because they've been around for so long, I feel like you can know what you're going to get with them. And I don't know, I feel like it's one of them teams where sometimes they have the chance to really excel, but you know what you're going to get with them, if that makes sense, I feel like.
Andretti have been in the news recently for something quite different.
Have they? Didn't know that.
Yeah, something about Formula One. Not sure what that is.
Rings a bell.
Anyway, whatever happens with that, you might be looking at 2 Formula One drivers in the future, Colton Herta and Carl Kirkwood, if obviously the situation changes. But you've got a really nice breed of Herta and Kirkwood, who are quite possibly two future stars of the series, and many have touted to be. And Marcus Ericsson's obviously a F1 veteran, and he's getting quite experienced in IndyCar now, and he's going to bring a bit more guidance to Herta and Kirkwood. So sort of anyone you're looking at a longer term to support, Herta and Kirkwood are fantastic options. They're both really fun guys as well, and they are the future stars of the series. And Andretti is sort of this big name trying to recapture their past glory, and they're, I think, planning now to actually have a plan to do that.
Next, you have Rahal, Lesserman, Lanigan Racing, who are another series that are kind of a family name after the family have been quite heavily involved in the series. Owned by Bobby Rahal, who is a former championship and Indy 500 winner. And they're an interesting team because they're coming off a very mixed 2023 season whereby they were absolutely outstanding on road courses, arguably the best team in the series. They were pretty strong on street courses increasingly through the year, but they were very poor on ovals. So it's going to be one to watch this year. I mean, they had Graham Rahal, who is son of team owner Bobby, bumped from the Indy 500, which is a travesty really for a team who actually won the race with Takuma Sato in 2020. And yeah, they've won one championship with Bobby Rahal in 1992, which I believe was the first year of the team. You've got Graham trying to kind of continue that family legacy, Graham Rahal. He's a 6-time race winner, has 29 podiums in 261 race starts. So he's one of the most experienced drivers in the field. Many have said he's past it. He's 35 years old now, but he's proved otherwise in 2023. He responded to that bumping from the Indy 500 with 2 pole positions, a podium, and showed some of the best form he's shown in over 5 years, really. So he's definitely one that he's a staple of the series. Then you've got Pietro Fittipaldi, who's another that people may recognise. He remains the Haas F1 reserve driver, but is running his first full-time IndyCar season after running partial seasons with Dale Coyne Racing in 2018 and 2021. He finished 9th in Portland in 2018. That's his best finish across those partial campaigns, but he's become a very accomplished driver in sports cars well outside of IndyCar. So he's one to watch, especially for a team that have shown they can really contend near the front of the field. Arguably the most exciting driver, though, on the books at Rahal, Lesserman, Lanigan, or RLL as we abbreviate them, is Denmark's Christian Lundgaard, who is 22 years old, another one of the young crop and another from an F2 background. There were really suggestions that he's almost too good for RLL if they remain kind of inconsistent, but he's under contract with the team, so they will keep hold of him for now. He took his first win last year on the streets of Toronto, which is very impressive in only his second year, coming off the back of being Rookie of the Year in 2022. Finished 8th in the championship last year, ahead of some of the drivers from IndyCar's so-called major teams, the big four. Rahal, Lesserman, Lanigan are not part of that. However, Lundgaard really managed to kind of creep into that crop and get amongst some of the series veterans and some of the series best talents, and he is really one of those big talents.
Yeah, I mean, RLL there's no way of being nice about it. They were awful on ovals last year. Their form wasn't very good. So one of the storylines this year is going to be how they recover that form. And Rahal's obviously trying to prove himself, whilst Lundgaard's continuing to develop himself as a young star of the series. And then you've got Fittipaldi, who is, to be honest, a bit of a question mark. It was a bit of a left field shout. We don't really know and what he's going to bring to the table. So again, another really interesting team to look out for. Their performance is going to be a big teller of 2024, and can this team with less resources match the big boys? Which is going to be an interesting team to follow for any newer fans.
I think it's one of them teams where you're going to, if there's a struggle, you're going to see that, and you're going to see them kind of work through it, and they're going to be kind of maybe open about it. And I feel like if that's kind of what you're looking for in a team, then I feel like they'd be really good. You know, like I said, it's not a surprise that they didn't have a good year, but then they bounce back from it a little bit, especially with Graham Rahal. He got bumped out in 500, and then he came back and he did really amazing. And yeah, it's just one of them teams where you see them struggle, but then you'll see them kind of build themselves back up again.
So next we've got Meyershank Racing, who are actually partners with Andretti. They have what they call a technical alliance. In IndyCar, they have strategic alliances and technical alliances where, you know, some of the smaller teams might team up with one of the major teams to share information, maybe share some resources. But Meyershank Racing, one of the newer teams, they only made their debut in 2017. And for them, it's all changed this year. They have got veterans Simon Pagenaud, who we mentioned was injured last year in a crash, and Helio Castro-Neves, who is a 4-time Indy 500 winner. They are exiting the team. Well, Castro-Neves is still running the Indy 500, but we'll come on to that. He's stepping back from full-time racing. So, yeah, it's all changed for them. They're running Felix Rosenqvist, who is coming from McLaren. He is the third Swedish driver on the grid after Lundqvist and Ericsson. He was at Ganassi prior to McLaren, so his experience in IndyCar has come at some of the series top teams, really. But this opens up an opportunity for him to become a team leader, really. He only has 1 win, but he has 5 poles, a total of 6 podiums. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he adapts into that leadership role, especially alongside a rookie driver. Well, feels a bit weird to call him a rookie because Tom Blomqvist is a very experienced driver. He won the IMSA Sports Car Championship in 2022. He was unfortunate not to defend that championship. He won the Daytona 24 Hours twice in a row. He was pretty standout this year as well. Finished second place, unfortunately, but he heads into the season in a strong fashion off the back of that. He's also running Formula E. He's beaten Max Verstappen in the Junior Championship. So while his recent background has been sports car driving, he does have open wheel pedigree. So he's definitely one to watch.
I mean, all we need to know about Meyershank Racing is they've got the only Brit in the series, and we're a British-based podcast, and Tom is representing the flag for us, and we've spoken to Tom as well. Fly back to episode 28, 27, 28, one of them, and you'll see our chat with Tom, and he's a great guy. So that's our reason to support Meyershank.
Yeah, I think also they have a lot of experience with them, like I said. So I feel like you're going to know that they're not going to be struggling as much. So.
Our episode with Tom Blomqvist was actually episode 22. It was a bit early.
Oh, it's miles off.
A little bit
miles off. I do apologise.
Ever so slightly off. So, rounding out the Honda teams, this one's a little bit difficult because the Dale Coyne Racing are notorious for announcing their drivers quite late, and just over 3 weeks out of the opening race, we still don't really have a massive idea of who is going to drive for them. They're an example of one of the teams that have drivers bring funding. They need drivers to kind of bring a sponsor rather than, be paid by the team, simply because they're one of IndyCar's smaller teams. And I think that's one of the things that's great about IndyCar is that you have these smaller teams, yet they are still competitive. They've lost David Malukas to McLaren this year, but he was a 2-time podium sitter with the team. They've recently had Romain Grosjean on their books as well. Yeah, I think he got 3 podiums with the team. So despite having never won a championship or an Indy 500, they are kind of one of the small teams that could. And that's the sort of story we like to see in IndyCar. And they've also lost Stingray Robb this year, who we will come on to in a bit. He's gone to AJ Foyt Racing, one of the coolest names in motorsport. They're one of the longest serving teams, been around since 1984, but it's uncertainty there at the moment. They could snap up Devlin DiFrancesco, who we mentioned made that unbelievable lap 1 overtake around the outside of 4 drivers. He was with Andretti last year, didn't massively impress. There's another Brit, Jack Harvey, who could be an option. He was with Meyer Shank Racing, was excellent there. Moved to Rahal Letterman Lanigan for 2022. 2 disappointing years there. He could be one that deserves a second chance, but we're not really sure yet who Dale Coyne Racing should field. So we will now get on to the Chevrolet cars, and this is the big one, really. Team Penske. They are the most successful team in the series, and they've been a part of it since 1968 and remain right at the head of field. They're owned by Roger Penske, who also owns the entire IndyCar series. They've got 19 Indy 500 wins, including last year, and 16 championships, most recently coming in 2022. And they undoubtedly head into the year with one of the best lineups, possibly the most complete lineup if you're looking on all fronts. You've got Joseph Newgarden, who won the Indy 500 last year, as we have mentioned, broke a 12-year duck of trying to win the race, failing to win the race, but with that last lap pass, produced a moment for the ages that has really sealed his legacy to build on his 2 championships in 2017 and 2019. He's won 29 races, which is pretty significant, really, in a series that is so competitive, and the fight for victories is really intense. I mean, we'll get onto his teammate Will Power, but he managed to win the championship in 2022 with 1 race win. So 29 race wins is pretty impressive for Newgarden. He was unlucky to finish 5th in the championship last year, which actually broke a streak of finishing 2nd in the championship for 3 years on the bounce. So yeah, there's a lot we can say with Newgarden. I mean, he had a historic year last year in some ways. He almost won all 5 oval races. He had won 4 in a row, or 5 in a row if you look back to the year prior. So he is arguably the best driver IndyCar has ever seen on an oval. So that's one to watch out for. You could witness a bit of greatness when we get to the late season oval races. But yeah, he didn't quite complete the season sweep there. He struggled a bit on road and street courses at times, but you'd expect him to be in the championship fight, as you would his teammate Scott McLaughlin, who, as you mentioned, Dan, is a driver to move over from Australian supercars, which is not necessarily a background that you would think is conducive to success in IndyCar. However, McLaughlin moved over in 2021 and has very quickly risen to be one of the best drivers in the championship. He won 3 championships in supercars, and ahead of his 4th year in IndyCar, kind of looks a good bet to possibly go and take the championship. He won 3 races in his sophomore year, his 2nd year in 2022, after being Rookie of the Year in what was really a learning year in 2021. Won 1 race last year, however, arguably had a better season, continued to progress, and finished 3rd in the championship ahead of his experienced teammates who both have over 10 years of experience in IndyCar. And this is a guy who we're talking about in only his 3rd year driving open wheel cars. So he's definitely one that people should be rooting for. He's a very impressive driver. Then finally you have Will Power. He's won 2 championships like Newgarden in 2014, then a big gap before he won again in 2022. But he has 41 race wins, which gives him the edge on Newgarden. He's been in the series for a bit longer. But yeah, he had a tough 2023. He had some off-track family issues, which are now resolved, we can say. But still, he's a king of qualifying. He has the most poles in IndyCar ahead of Mario Andretti. And he's, again, no doubt one of the best drivers in the series and arguably the fastest IndyCar has ever seen.
So a lot to like about Team Penske. Newgarden and McLaughlin are some of the most vocal on social media, particularly McLaughlin. So watching, I think maybe my favourite McLaughlin moment is, I can't remember what race it was, a few years ago. We had a red flag and we had a tour of his motorhome with his parents included or something like that, which was rather incredible. But he gives us great vibes on social media. And they did run a YouTube series called Boss Pros, although that's a bit up in the air whether that's going to happen again this year. Yeah, McLaughlin obviously came over from Australian touring cars with Shane Van Gisbergen, who some people might know is moving over to NASCAR this year after he kind of schooled the field last year. And then Will Power. And Will Power will never be afraid to speak his mind. I think Archie referred to a reference to Punch Another Driver at the start of the episode. That was stated by Will Power. What episode was that? Episode six or seven, six or seven, one of them.
Early on in our podcast.
We'll do a whole review on it. But yeah, he had quite an interesting session at a race last year, and he will speak his mind. If he's angry, he will let you know he's angry. And he's a very entertaining character, but he's also a very fast driver. So there's all of the drivers at Team Penske have their own individual attributes, which just make them really, really all quite fun.
Well, you mentioned McLaughlin's motorhome tour. He also ate some spicy cheese when there was a rain delay. I think it was, I can't remember what race. Maybe Nashville, possibly, or one of the ovals.
I think the tour was Nashville, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, there was I think it could have been the same thing. He was playing FIFA. This was, they should have been racing, but because there's a rule, I think stateside, where if there's lightning in the vicinity or within a certain distance, they're not allowed to race until it's cleared. And when they were having their break, the NBC crew on TV were trying to fill the time. And yeah, I think McLaughlin did start giving a tour of his bus, and yeah, was playing FIFA. Yeah, I think you mentioned his family might have been there, and then he ate some spicy cheese when he could be going in a car any minute.
Love it. You don't get that anywhere else.
I think as well, they're just, like I said, they're all kind of authentic as well in the way that if they think something, they will say it. They're not going to like shut up. That's just not how they are, especially Will Power. We've already gone over that. But also, they're all just really good drivers, and I think that kind of makes up the teams. And if you want kind of people who and a team who's going to be fighting for the championship and kind of be up at the top, it will be them. They will be somewhere roundabout up at the top, if not like first. So I think it's just one of them teams. If you want someone who are going to win some, lose some, but mostly win some, then it's going to be Penske.
So IndyCar is regarded to have the big three. You've got Penske, the most successful team. Then you've got Ganassi and you've got Andretti. But Arrow McLaren are the disruptors. Obviously, we don't need to explain who McLaren are. They're very established in motorsport, in F1, obviously. They made their IndyCar debut originally as Sam Schmidt Motorsports in 2001. They're yet to win a 500 or a championship, but since rebranding to McLaren, they're one of the team's new modern chargers, and you could almost say it's a big four now, because McLaren are right up there. They're getting very close to delivering championship winning cars. They have drivers who certainly are good enough to win championships, and they were strangely winless in 2023, albeit they had another year that I would say was relatively encouraging.
They shouldn't have been winless.
They shouldn't have been winless. That is for sure, because Pato O'Ward, who is their main charger, really, the Mexican driver, he is a phenomenal talent. He's right up there with Colton Herta, Kyle Kirkwood as IndyCar's best young drivers. I think many really believe he is possibly the best of that young crop. He's already come close to championships and Indy 500 wins, despite only being 24 years old, and he's often been unlucky. He's only got 4 wins in IndyCar. Probably could be double that realistically if it wasn't for quite a lot of misfortune. I would say, and Dan will agree when we get onto his views in a minute, that O'Ward is probably the most exciting driver to watch. He's got nicknames such as Fast Hands, the Ninja, because of his driving style, which is really something to behold. You could watch O'Ward pounding in laps for a whole day probably and not get that bored. Yeah, he's developed some consistency late in 2023 that he actually lacked prior. So I think that definitely makes him one to keep an eye out in terms of being championship material this year. You've then got David Malukas, who is another talented young American. However, he's a bit of an unknown. He's moving over from Dale Coyne Racing. Really, that second McLaren seat, the number 6 car, seemed to belong to Alex Palou, who McLaren had on their books as an F1 reserve, but he decided no, he wanted to stay at Ganassi, which led to a whole legal dispute over his contract, which we won't get into. You can look back in our archive for more on that, because it's not a particularly new fan-friendly discussion. It's quite complicated. So McLaren moved for Malukas, who is definitely one of the most exuberant personalities. He likes to make his own memes and is very active over on Twitter. He's well worth a follow. And he's fast on track too. He stood out for Coyne, who are they've been a struggling team. As I mentioned, 2 podiums back-to-back years on the Worldwide Technology Raceway, or Gateway as we call it, oval. He's got a lot to prove this year, but it'll certainly be an exciting ride to follow along with what Malukas gets up to at McLaren. Then you've got Alexander Rossi, who is another that kind of dabbled briefly into F1 before moving to IndyCar. He won the Indy 500 on his debut in 2016 and joined McLaren last year after a spell with Andretti, who had been his only previous team in IndyCar. He has 8 wins, all came during his time with Andretti, and 7 of them came before the aero screen, which maybe we'll touch on quickly now, which is a safety measure, which is essentially equivalent to F1's halo, but has essentially like a windscreen over the front of it. That kind of changed things a bit for Andretti. They have been not performed as well since then, and Rossi was kind of impacted by that. So he only has 1 win since that came in 2020. That came in 2022. I think his previous win before that was in 2019. So he went 3 years pretty much winless. He had a decent first year at McLaren, came 9th in the championship for the 3rd time in 4 years, but he really wants to get back to establishing the form that saw him finish 2nd and 3rd in the championship while he was at Andretti. So take it away, guys. McLaren, they're one of the easiest teams to root for, I think. And Dan, I know you're a big Pato O'Ward supporter.
Yeah. I think if you're looking for a new team, McLaren probably the easiest to get into. One, because the link to the F1 team are actually quite strong. They are very substantial. Pato O'Ward is the McLaren F1 reserve driver. He is the only IndyCar driver with official F1 links. And then obviously Malukas is a character. His own memes there's an image somewhere of him making his own race winner graphic, which is quite funny. But he's a bright light. He brings a lot of energy. And then you've got Rossi, which is Aaron McLaren, just like doing F1, have got great PR. They're absolutely excellent at their social media work. But Rossi's like the awkward dad sort of thing. Malukas and O'Ward are both very silly, very childish. But Rossi's they sort of, I don't really know how to describe it. They sort of just portray Rossi as this really awkward older man who's a lot more mature, but it actually works out quite well in some aspects. It's quite hard to explain, but Rossi's awkwardness almost makes it a lot better. But on track, they're a fantastic team. Obviously, Pato O'Ward is one of the stars of the future. Well, he's one of the stars currently, no doubts about it. And he has been quite unlucky in his career. He probably would have doubled those races. I could count them all off if I wanted to. But he's an immensely fast guy. His driving style is unique. It's sort of just chuck it in, see how it does, and hopefully it'll be all right. Which is fun to watch in qualifying laps. He's toned it down a little bit now. He used to be really bad, but he's toned it down a bit now. But yeah, he's obviously very naturally quick. He's probably, I might be bold saying, it's the 2nd best oval driver after Newgarden, potentially. I might be being a bit optimistic here. But he's very quick at the ovals, especially at the 500 as well.
Yeah, I think if you want a team that just has a lot of character, I think that's definitely going to be Aaron McLaren. Like I said, with Pato O'Ward and David Malukas as well. And like you said, it's very easy to kind of get involved. They have a great online presence. It's just very encouraging in a way that we've talked about accessibility and how it feels like we're all included, but Aaron McLaren does that really well. He does that the best in terms of the social media and everything like that. It generally is definitely the easiest to get involved with, I will say that. And yeah, it's kind of like, I think Dan kind of mentioned this, it's kind of like 2 kids and a dad, just like the calming figure, and they played into this around Christmas with the Christmas cards and the Christmas photos. And I think they definitely, like I said, just have the best, engaging presence with the fans.
So we'll just rattle through the final 3 Chevrolet teams. We've got Ed Carpenter Racing, who are owned by driver Ed Carpenter. He runs an oval schedule for the team. They only made their debut in 2012. They're yet to win a 500 championship, but they have won 6 races across 11 years, which for one of the smaller teams is a decent output. They were a bit disappointing last year. They changed one of their drivers, Connor Daly, mid-season because they were underperforming. It wasn't particularly fair for them to do that. I don't think it was really anything to do with the drivers. That they generally, as a team, just struggle for performance. But yeah, they're often a hub for young drivers. They have a youthful road and street course lineup this year, starting with Christian Rasmussen, who is Danish, the second Dane along with Christian Lundgaard. He is an ex-DIVEBOMB partnered driver, which is a fun fact. So we've got our ties with Christian. He's running the road and street courses along with the Indy 500. And he's another that has won all of the 3 pre-IndyCar ladder series championships. He won Indy Next last year, which, as I mentioned, used to be called Indy Lights. That's the top rung on the ladder leading up to IndyCar. There were times there that he felt he might not even be able to continue due to lacking funding, but he pulled through, which is a great story, really. He's got an extensive resume, actually, at 23 years old. He won the Daytona 24 Hours 2 weeks ago in the LMP2 class, and it's always intriguing seeing how the rookies get on. So, yeah, he's an interesting one, and it's Rinus VK, who is from the Netherlands, another one of our European drivers who completes their road and street course lineup. He's also only 23, however, he is fairly experienced in IndyCar now. He won a race in 2021, and this will kind of be his first year as a proper leader of the team. He's already got 63 races under his belt, 4 years in IndyCar. He's one that always goes really well at the Indy 500. He's qualified 4th. I think that was his rookie year, then 3rd, and 2nd. So on track for a possible pole. Last year was his first without a podium, actually, but he's one that's coveted by big teams. So yeah, he's another one that's interesting. One of a lot of young drivers. I mean, you've got kind of a crop of experienced drivers. I mean, you have drivers in their 40s, but then you also have a massive youth presence in IndyCar. I mean, I'll quickly touch on Ed Carpenter, who's one of those that's a little bit older. He's 42. He's going to be running the ovals in the number 20 car, along with Rasmussen, as I said, doing the road and street courses. So yeah, Carpenter dropped from a full-time to part-time schedule in 2014, which was 2 years after founding the Ed Carpenter Racing team. He still has the ability to be fast on ovals, but I think 2023 was a bit disappointing. But he's often a feature near the front during the Indy 500. So yeah, they're one of the more interesting teams. They've got an interesting lineup, I think.
Yeah. But we need to know Rasmussen is DIVEBOMB associated, so your region to support them.
Also, in terms of VK, he does kind of really well on the ovals, especially like the Indy 500. We kind of saw it last year. So yeah, if you want someone good at ovals, I guess support them.
So then we've got Juncos Hollinger Racing, who are another newer team. They made their debut in 2017, ran until 2019, but returned in 2021 with Callum Ilott, who, again, many will know from F2. We interviewed him back end of last year. I think that episode was released 2nd of January, maybe. So he went full-time in 2022. The team then expanded to 2 cars after that 1 year. So successful. And there was unfortunately a falling out with Ilott. The team have been criticised for how they dealt with that. But this year they're lining up with Romain Grosjean as part of their team, also with a newfound alliance with McLaren, a strategic alliance. So they'll hope that can maybe bolster them further. They're one of the teams with lower resources. But Grosjean, obviously, again, not one we have to say much about. F1 fans will know him. He spent a year at Dale Coyne Racing, got 3 podiums in his debut year, then moved to Andretti, actually struggled more at one of the leading teams, finished 13th in the championship both seasons there. So yeah, a little bit disappointing, but he moves kind of looking for a new lease of life at Juncos Hollinger Racing. He's often a fiery character, Grosjean. I think that was one reason why it kind of didn't work out for him at Andretti, but yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works out for a team who have been known for their own fiery dealings with the whole Ilott situation. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can thrive back in a sort of lower pressure environment. Then you've got Agustin Canapino, another to come from a touring car background. Bit of an unknown before he came into IndyCar last year, but again, with no open wheel experience, he was on the pace. He was really competitive and was actually the second best rookie in the end of 4, with the 2 below him actually having experience on a lot of the tracks from the road to Indy, as we call the ladder series. So yeah, they're another, again, interesting team. Every team's interesting. There's storylines everywhere you look, I think.
Yeah, Canapino gives us great vibes. He's a great guy. He for context, we've gone to this before, but he spoke like no English when he came into IndyCar, so it was quite funny. We sort of learned a lot about him very quickly, and he's just a fun guy. And then Grosjean, yeah, you know him from his F1 day. His IndyCar career sort of mirrored his F1 career, which showed loads of early promise. Then it didn't quite work out, and then it sort of was just filled with crashes and incidents. And hopefully, this is the year where he recovers that. So again, it's an interesting storyline to watch out for this year. For any newer fans, I'm sure most of you would know Romain Grosjean.
I was going to say, it's like I said, if you want some sort of like familiarity, some like F1 or anything like that, then you can go with them for Romain Grosjean. I think sometimes you can get your hopes up a bit, but that's fine. You know, he has his moments, and I think that's why he kind of has his fans and why his fans kind of love him in that way.
Yeah, Grosjean's a wild ride. He's an exciting one. As can be a wild ride also, AJ Foyt Racing, the team of the great AJ Foyt. They joined the series in 1964. They've got 3 Indy 500 wins, 5 championships to their name. They had a very strong Indy 500 last year. Both drivers got into the Fast 12, and it was very impressive for a team that, you know, struggled quite a lot elsewhere. They need to improve on road and street courses. They now have an alliance with Team Penske, another one of these teams that have partnered with one of the major teams in the series. But yeah, they're a team that are aiming to get away from the back of the field this year. Their lineup has Santino Ferrucci, who, yeah, talking of wild rides, he's probably one of the wildest rides in the series. He's one of the more contentious figures. He's not particularly well liked amongst the drivers. He's quite aggressive on track, but he's very, very fast. He got his first career podium with a 3rd place in last year's Indy 500, and he's not had much continuity in his career, but he's returning for a 2nd year at Foyt, which will only be his 3rd full-time season in IndyCar, despite actually this being, I think it's his 7th year of competing in the series in some sort of basis. So yeah, he's one that's kind of targeting becoming more than just a super sub, and maybe this year is the year that really cements himself as a key part of the series. And he lines up alongside, as I briefly mentioned, one of the greatest names in motorsport and probably the whole world, to be honest, Stingray Robb. He's coming from Dale Coyne Racing, so kind of switching from one team towards the back of the grid to another. But he didn't have a great year in his rookie year last year with Coyne, but he finished 2nd in Indy Lights in 2022. He brings funding to the team as well, which is another thing that makes him attractive. But there were some signs of pace as the year went on, and he's another really, really good character. We interviewed him quite early in the podcast, so that's definitely worth a listen, because he's a very entertaining guy, and he's better in his 2nd years usually in championships. So again, another one to watch, really. But that is an interesting lineup, definitely.
It's a mix of interesting characters. Let's say that. Real mix.
I mean, like we said, we interviewed Stingray. He was a very down to earth guy. I think he's very nice as well. If you want a reason to support Santino Ferrucci, maybe just the hair aspect. Maybe I feel like that kind of draws people towards him. I think he's got a mullet. Yeah, I think that's his pride and joy, I'm gonna guess. But
yeah, and Rob said it looks like he's putting a fork in an electrical appliance. That's what he insinuated. So yeah, there's something. So yeah, we've not got much time left, so we'll cover the Indy 500 only entries another time. But you've got just to run through it. Helio Castroneves, 4-time winner for Meyer Shank Racing. One of the stories of the season, NASCAR's Kyle Larson competing with McLaren. Dreyer and Reinbold Racing, who are a team who only nowadays compete in the Indy 500. They're running Ryan Hunter Ray, who is a championship and Indy 500 winner, and Connor Daly, who is one of the strongest in the Indy 500, born in Indiana, an Indiana native. Then you've got Marco Andretti running for Andretti, part of a long line of Andretti's, son of Michael, grandson of the great Mario, and then possibly more. We don't know yet. We'll report as and when.
We've been asked some viewer questions, so we'll quickly run over them. And there's quite a lot about how we watch it. We'll actually save it for our season preview, because I don't think all the broadcasters have been announced yet. So when we get to our season preview, we'll give you a full list of all the broadcasters and where you can watch it, because obviously that's quite important. Why do teams with different liveries for each car? It mainly just comes down to sponsorship. That's how the series runs. You need the money to come into the series to run in different cars. And as we said earlier, it creates some quite cool liveries.
Yeah, I think we covered it mostly earlier, didn't we, to be fair? But it can be difficult to distinguish the drivers. I mean, having continuity team to team can make it easier to spot who's who and who's racing for what team. But it's all part of the fun, having such difference between drivers, even within teams, and then week to week things changing. But I'd look out for spotter guys before every race, because you will be able to find out who's running what.
I think the main reason is sponsors, but the other reason is just depends on how the drivers feel, or if the teams want to kind of have a special car, special livery. You kind of see it in some other series, but if they feel like it's a special race, get a new livery.
Who is considered the IndyCar GOAT? Now, this is quite a tough question. Modern day, it's Scott Dixon. If we're looking all time, probably Mario Andretti, AJ Foyt. Probably give it to Foyt because he's got the most championships and the most Indy 500 wins, but a bit of a conscientious one.
Yeah, I'd agree there. I mean, Foyt has the most wins with 67, the most championships with 7, and then it's Dixon right behind him. So, yeah, they're probably the two. And then obviously Mario Andretti is an iconic figure.
Can you explain the strategies? Well, not really. But long story short, road street courses are 2 tyre compounds. The blacks, which are like the equivalent of the hards in F1, durable, not as fast but longer lasting. Then you've got the alternates, which are the red tyres. They're fast, but they don't last as long. Is the long story short. And then it's very dependent on fuel load. Some circuits might prefer the red tyre. Some circuits might prefer the black tyre. It's quite hard to say because it changes race to race. But you need to use one of the 2 tyres. Some circuits prefer different. And then it obviously depends on fuel load, depending on how long the race is and how aggressive you want to go on strategy.
Yeah, I think as well it changes, it doesn't just change between team to team, it changes driver to driver. So I think sometimes, especially towards the beginning, it's very hard to get a grasp on what people are doing, because each driver has its own kind of team, its own strategies working against it. So, and there's no team orders either, so there's not going to be teammates kind of helping each other out. So it's, once again, it depends on the race and what's kind of best for that.
Is push to pass a hybrid system? If not, what do the hybrid plans look to do? Well, bit of a conscientious point again. The hybrids were supposed to come at the start of the season and now been delayed into midpoint of this season. The push to pass system, just for any newer fans, get 200 seconds as like a speed boost, pretty much. You get more power, and for 200 seconds in the race, you can deploy it any time you want. That's going to be phased out and replaced by like an ERS system as part of the hybrid, which is coming in mid-season, which is the way forward. So push to pass, again, it's probably something new fans are quite acclimatized. So you've got 200 seconds of it, and you just use it as like an energy boost thing.
Yeah, but that couldn't recharge. Now, when the hybrid is introduced at some point after the Indy 500, we don't know exactly when yet, drivers will then be able to recharge. I think the series say that, the lack of limit, there are only 200 seconds of push to pass. There won't be a limit on the ERS because it will recharge. A bit like F1, really, under braking or what have you. It's expected to give the drivers more control, give more kind of strategies in terms of how they use their energy. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of it. It kind of turns more into an F1 style thing, actually, than what it was prior with push to pass.
Excellent. So that's some of your questions. If you've got any more questions, feel free to DM us or message us at Project DIVEBOMB on Instagram, or comment on our YouTube post or whatever, and we will try and get back to it in a future episode. So keep them coming in, and we'll answer some more of them when we can. But I think that's all we've got time for. So any viewer fans, I hope you sort of grab the grasp. There's a lot of information to take in, but hopefully you grab some of the key bits and could absorb it all and look forward to the season. So our next 2 episodes are, again, all looking forward to the season. We've got season predictions, followed by our season preview coming up. So almost there at St. Petersburg, so hold on tight, IndyCar fans, we are almost there. So next week we're going to be looking at some of the key storylines of the season, so we're going to delve into our key bits of the season as part of our preview for the season. So keep your eye on that. It's going to be quite a good episode, delving into some of the key bits to look out for, and obviously it's going to take a lot of that from this episode as well. So looking forward to that. So thank you all very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully we'll see you then.